We're going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone. I wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar. I am your host and speaker tonight, Lauren Levine. A lot of you may know me as the Digital Dentist. That name actually came about from like 20 years ago. I was writing a column for Dental Economics, and the byline or the articles was the Digital Dentist, and the name just kind of stuck. And eventually my website became thedigital.dentist.com, and everything's kind of built around that. But that's who I am. I'm thrilled to have such a great turnout this evening. We had close to 200 people registered. A lot of you are here or logging in right now. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping first, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. First and foremost, of course, I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe. A month ago, I was telling people on webinars that looks like we're finally out of the woods, and now not so much, unfortunately, but we will get there. Secondly, obviously, I commend you for being here this evening, continuing your dental education. I think the need for education never ends, no matter where we're at in the dental field. So the theme of the presentation this evening is what you don't know really can hurt you. And whenever I do a webinar, I've been lecturing for 20 plus years. The approach that I take is if you learn one thing that you didn't know before this evening, then I have been successful in accomplishing my goals. If it's one thing, and if I can give you some steps to take that you can, to get your office in a better shape, to protect and secure what many people would probably think is their most, far and away, their most critical asset, which is their patient data, then I've accomplished my goals. A few things. As with all my webinars, I'm recording this. I'm going to send out a link to the recording probably later this evening, maybe sometime tomorrow. So just in case you don't make it until the end, don't worry about it. You can, or you just want to, review it at your leisure, show it to your staff or to the dentist if there's staff members on here. That's perfectly fine. You'll have a link that you can download it and do what you want with it. One of the things that is always important to me is that you get your questions answered. When we are done, there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. Many of you have been on webinars that I've hosted with other companies in the past. So you kind of know how the format works. You have a control panel on your screen where you can just go ahead and type in your question. Obviously, when we have 200 plus people, we can't do verbal questions, but just typing them in. I'm going to take them in the order that I receive them at the end. It's just me presenting tonight, unlike other evenings where there's another speaker. So, I minimize that panel while I'm presenting my material, meaning I won't be able to get to the questions until I'm done speaking. As I said, answering questions is really critical to me. I'm actually planning, I think my next webinar is going to be where I'm just going to say, hey, when you register, tell me what your questions are, and I'm going to take the top 12, 15 questions and answer them during the webinar. That's kind of the format for tonight as well, as you'll see in a minute, is questions. But really, that's the critical thing here, is I want to make sure that you do have time to get your questions answered. Also, I don't think I mentioned this when I sent out the invitations, but I will be providing California approved CE credits for everyone. Almost every state accepts California CE, so you'll get a form that you just put in your name, and it'll have all the information that you would need to submit it to your state boards. So I don't know what the rules are with California. Every state's somewhat different, but I think you need to be here for like 75, 80% of the way. If you're here until the end, at least till the Q&A starts, then for sure you'll get the CE. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. I'm going to click right here. For those of you who don't know me, I do see the people who are on this evening. A lot of you are clients of mine. Some are people who are thinking about becoming clients. Some are people that we've never met before. As I said, everyone knows me as the digital dentist. I was a full-time practicing periodontist for 10 years. Most of you, if you do perio, perio is tough. And one of the things I learned, which I wish I had known before I started my perio career, but certainly learned as I was going through it, is that I'm the type of person that likes to feel if I do the same thing over and over again, I'm going to usually get the same results over and over again. With IT, cybersecurity, HIPAA, that's all pretty much true. Perio patients, not a chance. So much is dependent on, as you all know, on their home care And it was just became very frustrating for me that I was doing surgery on people who really didn't have great home care. They wouldn't have been in my office in the first place if they had great home care. And then 6 months later, the pockets are back, the calculus is back, the bleeding's back, and I'm scratching my head like, why did I do this? I'm very lucky that I was able to combine probably my two biggest passions in life. One, which is dentistry. The second is IT. My family owned an electronics business when I was growing up in Canada. I grew up with technology. My best friend and I built our first computer back in 1977. This was even before floppy disks. We had to use a cassette tape. And for those of you who are too young to know what cassette tapes are, ask your parents. But that was the medium. There was no floppy disks. And obviously IT has come a long way since there. Along the way, I became certified with HIPAA, with computer repair, networking. For most people in the dental field, they don't really care what certifications you have, and I don't really talk about them a lot. I'm just, I've been doing this for a couple of decades, and hopefully know a little bit more than the average person when it comes to this. So that's basically who I am and what I do. We're full service IT. We work with offices that need help with everything. It starts off with computers and networking and monitors and mounts and sensors and cameras and all that stuff. The focus really the last few years has been on HIPAA starting in 2013 when the final omnibus rules were passed. And then certainly the last few years, cybersecurity, HIPAA, they're all really big topics right now. So yeah, we're full service. We do everything, but usually the people that are coming to work, that work with us, they want help with HIPAA and cybersecurity. And we're going to be talking about that this evening. So that's the format for this evening. What I decided to do is a little bit different than what I've done in the past. I've already introduced myself, so you know who I am. And what I'm doing is an FAQ, frequently asked questions. What I did is I went through a bunch of emails over the last couple of months. I get emails almost every day. I'm very active on Dentaltown, my Facebook page, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. People are always reaching out. And I took, what are the 10 most common questions that I see? That's the format for the webinar. We'll talk about what those are in a minute. I have a couple of special offers to make to all of you at the end, some free stuff, and then we'll get into the Q&A session. So what are those most frequently asked questions? As I said, that there are 10. What is cybersecurity? This is, I talk about cybersecurity a lot. You hear about it in the news a lot, but what is it? What exactly does that term mean? I think that's obviously important as you're dealing with it. What is ransomware? Almost impossible to, I don't know if people still read newspapers, but log on to a website and not see the latest ransomware outbreak. It's almost daily. There was this one yesterday with Accenture. Most of you have heard about some of the other big ones, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But what exactly is ransomware, and why is it such a big deal, and why is it something that dental offices need to worry about? Does HIPAA play a part in any of this? I'll give you a hint. The answer is yes, it does. It's a big part. That's probably one of the few good things about HIPAA and cybersecurity, and I talk about this all the time with our clients, is that the things that you do to get yourself more cyber secure, and we'll talk about that this evening, also are going to get you more HIPAA compliant as well. You're oftentimes killing two birds with one stone. So that's the one and only good thing, I think, with some of this stuff. How do I protect my data? What are the things that I should be doing in order to make sure that data is protected and secure? What does a firewall do? We talk about firewalls all the time, but a lot of people don't know, well, what does that mean? What is a firewall? Is it something that's built into my router or my switch? Or do I need a separate device? What exactly is a firewall, and why do I need one? We're going to talk about something that, as I said, I've been doing this for close to 20 years. And like most things in dentistry, back when I started in my practice, the first implants that I was reading about were subperiosteal implants. We didn't even have endosteal implants. As I said, when I started in IT, there was no floppy drives. So like dentistry, technology is constantly changing. And of all the things that we've been working with our clients over the last number of years, application whitelisting ring fencing, which we tested for about 6 months. We beta tested with a number of our clients. We started applying that over the last 2 or 3 months. I am more excited about this and what it can do than any other technology when it comes to cybersecurity. And we'll talk a little bit, obviously, about what that is and what some examples of it are, and what it can do for your practice. How do I keep my systems up to date? One of the questions we get from people is, do I need to keep my systems up to date? And if so, how do I do that? So we'll certainly touch on that. What's the best way to back up my data? You go to 5 dentists, you're going to get 5 different treatment plans. You go to 5 IT companies, you're going to get 5 different recommendations on how to back up your data. The system that we use for our clients, we've got about 175, 180 clients or so that we're doing just backup for them. Works. Doesn't mean that there's not other ways of doing it, but I'll explain my thinking process as far as why we set up the way we do and what we recommend for offices. Do I have to encrypt my data? A lot of questions about that, about emails, about data at rest, the data on my server. Do I have to encrypt it? And if so, how do I go about doing that? And then finally, and there's different terms to this. Some people use risk analysis, risk assessment. They all kind of mean the same thing. But what does that actually mean, and do I need to do it? So these are all the things that we're going to hopefully hit on this evening. This is going to be a relatively brief webinar. Some of the webinars I've done in the past are an hour and a half, 2-hour webinars. I'd be surprised if this goes longer than 45, 50 minutes. I'm really going to get to the meat of it, not a lot of fluff in this. So why are we here? Why are we talking about cybersecurity and HIPAA? Why is this such a big deal? And, I just this is just some stuff that I pulled from the news recently. Many of you probably heard about this as well. Up to 1,500 businesses affected in ransomware attack targeting an IT software management company called Kaseya. And Kaseya was something that we had used in the past. We don't use it anymore. Pretty much all IT companies use some type of what's called an RMM, Remote Monitoring and Management System. Kaseya is the biggest one out there. But they tend to be used by IT companies that do small to medium-sized business. And you can see I actually, from that news article from the CDA, they actually talked about dental practices as being a target of that. So they were all over the news. That was only a couple of weeks ago, actually. People were talking about Kaseya. Most of you had probably heard about Colonial Pipeline, one of the biggest ransomware attacks out there. They ended up paying something like, $8 million. Apparently, they got a good chunk of that back, which I'm not sure how. But and all of that came, and you can see I highlighted there, was a result of a single compromised password. One person, as you all know, with COVID, a lot of people are working remotely. It's a lot more challenging to set up IT systems when it comes to cybersecurity, HIPAA compliance, when someone's working remotely. And all it takes, as you can see here, one single compromised password, and the company was shut down for days. I think it was like a week or so. Any of you that lived on the East Coast will probably remember the lines for gas. It was a mess. So that's all it took. Of course, I'm sure many of you on the call tonight were familiar with the ransomware attack. This has hit 400 dental offices. It says across the U.S. Most of them were in Wisconsin. It was one specific IT company out there that were hit. This was back in 2019. A few months after that, there was another 100 offices that were hit in Colorado. Same type of situation as well. All of it works from the same process, and that is that. And this is something that is critical, and I never try to criticize other companies. When I was a practicing periodontist, a lot of patients would come in and say how great their dentist was, and I'd look in their mouth, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, no, they're not. But, of course, I would never say that. Same thing with my current career. I would never criticize other companies, but it's important to know that your IT company is a potential source of risk for a lot of you. All of us, as I said, we use remote management and monitoring, these RMM systems. The emphasis is on the word remote, that we can log into your systems remotely, do anything that we need to do. One of the things that we can do is to be able to move files to your computer from ours and from yours to ours. So as you can imagine, that is a real potential source of risk. And what happened is that this company, what used to be called Screen Connect, now it's called ConnectWise Control, is something that we use. So if you could get into my ConnectWise Control panel, you would, in theory, have access to, we have about 1,400 computers that we're monitoring and managing at any one time. you would have full access to every one of those computers. So these companies, a number of months ago decided, well, okay, we need to obviously do a little bit better job with security. We're going to require what's called 2FA or 2MA, which is two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Most of you, I've seen this with other types of websites where you go to log into a secure website, and in order to do that, once you've entered your username and password, they send you a second code, and that code usually goes to your cell phone. It can go to an email as well. You have to enter that second code in order to then log into the website. It can be defeated, but it's a lot more secure than not having that. And what apparently happened with those 400 offices in Wisconsin is that the IT company had never implemented that. Even though the company was basically mandated, it was required that you have that two-factor authentication. I think if you were using like the trial version of their software, which they apparently were using, that it wasn't mandatory, that you didn't have to do that. And that's how the hackers got in. They got into their portal and were able to hit those 400 offices all at once. They could literally push out ransomware to 400 offices simultaneously. So, part of what I'm talking about this evening are not just the things that you need to be doing as what's called a covered entity by HIPAA, as someone that's responsible for the management of that data, but the questions that you should be asking your IT company as well. Are they doing these things? Some of the things I'm going to be talking about tonight, like risk assessments and application whitelisting, most of them don't do. And again, it's not a knock against them. We try to be, because this is my focus, we try to be cutting edge, bleeding edge on some of this. But if you talk to your IT company, say, hey, you guys doing any application whitelisting, they might look at you like, what are you talking about? What's that? So that's part of the reason I'm doing this evening, is to hopefully give you some information that you can use. Ransomware is just huge. 41% of all cyber insurance claims in the first half of 2020 was ransomware. Here's some sobering statistics as well, and I apologize, it's a little hard to read on the screen depending on how big your screen is. But basically 34%, a third of all healthcare organizations were hit with ransomware last year. Of those, 2/3 said that their data was encrypted. A little less than half were able to restore it by using a backup. And again, we're going to talk about that this evening. A third of them had to pay the ransom in order to get their data back. And we'll talk about why that was the case. But right below that, you can see this is actually, to me, the most sobering, though. However, on average, only 69% of the encrypted data was restored after the ransom was paid. Just because you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the unlock key, and there's no guarantee that it's going to work. And there's no guarantee that it's going to unlock all of your encrypted data. It's why I've always felt that a backup, especially an offsite backup, is so critical in this process, because even with the best local backup, and the ones that we do for our clients, we consider them to be good backups, but nothing is immune to ransomware. It really is a big thing. What is really happened over the last number of months is that you've got what's called ransomware as a service, where some companies like Revel, for example, what they do is they create the ransomware, but then they basically allow other companies to buy it from them. They don't pay up front. They give them a percentage of whatever they collect. So they're basically creating the ransomware so that these other criminals can go out, hack, and then they pay, I think it's something like 15% or whatever of whatever they collect to the company that they bought the ransomware from. So it really is big business. And certainly with COVID, that didn't help. People out of their offices for weeks or months at a time, remote workers. It's really become a huge issue. And it's why I wanted to talk about that this evening and give you some of those statistics. Some pearls of wisdom when it comes to, dealing with all these issues. I'm going to talk about the things that we do for our clients, my philosophy. And as I said, you talk to other IT people, you're going to get different opinions. And it doesn't mean that one person is right or one person's wrong, or there's a best thing. Just like in dentistry, there's things that work well in your hands and things that don't work so well in your hands, or work well in your hands but not in someone else's hands. There's no best system. It's what really works best for you. You got to make sure that you don't put the cart before the horse, meaning that you get your ducks in a row first. There's certain things, like, for example, a lot of times people will come to me and say, hey, I really want to get a really good backup in place, and I really want to get HIPAA compliant. And I'll say, great, well, we should probably start with some type of risk assessment. And they're like, well, do I have to do that? And why is it important? And to me, that's like, a new patient walks into your practice. You don't start treating them right away. I mean, at least I hope you don't, unless it's an emergency. But, if you're like most offices, you're going to take some radiographs and do your perio charting and restorative charting and intraoral, extraoral exams and cancer screening. And based on all of that, you come up with a treatment plan and you go ahead and start treating. And that's kind of the same thing. There's no doubt that there are expenses with that. And I won't lie and say, hey, there's a great free options out there. Most of these things do have a cost associated with it. In real estate, they always say the three most important things are location, location, location. For me, when it comes to IT, HIPAA compliance, cybersecurity, it's planning, planning, planning. Nothing wrong with doing things in stages. We have a number of clients we work with that do exactly that, as long as you've got a plan of how you're going to go about doing that. So let's get into some of these frequently asked questions. A lot of times people say, well, what is cybersecurity? What does that actually mean? So it's really just a body of technologies, processes, practices designed to protect networks, devices like computers, programs, and data from attack or unauthorized access. It's also sometimes called information technology security. But what does that mean? That's the really broad definition. So what I did is I said, well, for dental offices, what does cybersecurity typically entail? And as I said, we're going to talk about all these things individually. Number one, a firewall. In my opinion, you absolutely should have a firewall in place, not the one that's built into your router or your ISP modem, but a real firewall. Encryption, we'll talk about encryption and why that's so important. Patching of your systems. There's two ways that malware can usually typically get into your system, into your network. One is through email. That's far and away the most common way. The second most common is unpatched operating systems. Most of you are probably familiar with the fact that Microsoft ended support for Windows 7 back in January of last year. And it wasn't so much that they ended the support that we worried about, that they ended the patching as well. You had no more security patches. So that put the systems at risk, made you not compliant with HIPAA. So, you have to have some type of automated patching going on in place. The fourth thing is I think you should have anti-ransomware software. There's a lot of antivirus programs out there that will tell you, hey, we do a great job against the ransomware. In my experience, that's not really the case. Some do better than others, but they're not a horrible expense. Most of the really good anti-ransomware software programs are around $30-40 a computer per year. Really a good investment when you compare what happens, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, about what happens if you don't have it in place. But you still should have some general antivirus software in place as well. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about application whitelisting and ring fencing and what exactly that is and why it can really be helpful. You absolutely need to have a backup and disaster recovery system by HIPAA laws, by just common sense laws. You really have to have a good backup in place that you test and verify and do test restores on. You need to get your staff trained, obviously, on a regular basis. And as I said, you really should be doing a risk assessment on a regular basis as well. So what about ransomware? It's kind of related to cybersecurity. I'm sure, as I said, most of you have been hearing about this almost every day. It's all across the news. So it's a special type of virus. We also call viruses malware. It prevents or limits users from accessing their system. There's a couple ways that it does it. Sometimes it'll lock the screen. The most common way that it do it is it locks the files, and then they put a ransomware note on your desktop when you first log in. Some of the more current ones, which are called crypto ransomware, they encrypt certain types of files, and they force you to pay the ransom online in order to get that decryption key. So this is what we got this from one of our clients. This wasn't a client of ours before. It wasn't like someone who already had all the things that we recommend for them. This is before they got that stuff. But this is what they came to one morning, where it tells them that all the files had been encrypted. You have to use a special browser. You can't use Chrome. You have to use what's called a Tor browser, which is it's an encrypted browser. You have to, they give you all the instructions there. In case some of you were thinking, hell, I can just give them a credit card and then cancel it. No, that's not the way it works. You have to pay with some type of encrypted cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. As I said, it's extremely rare. I'm not sure how Colonial Pipeline was able to get some of their ransom paid back. but they're a multi-billion-dollar company, and they probably had the weight of the government behind them. Most of us do not have that pull to accomplish something like this, but it's the worst thing you could possibly see when you log in and see that note there. So, and basically you can't open any of your programs at that point. That the files are locked. You can't, and they even tell you, don't try to that changes the extension to some extension. You can't just change it back to whatever extension was. There's literally nothing you can do. Most of the better ransomware out there are not able to be unencrypted without the key. There's just no way of doing that. What happens if you get ransomware? I mean, why is this such a big deal? So you've got a backup, you get hit, but it's not a big deal, right? You can recover from this. Well, and these are national statistics. For dental, at least with our clients, it was that we've had a few people that were hit with ransomware. It did not take us 7.3 days to get them back up and running. Most of them was more like a day and a half to 2 days. The biggest thing with ransomware isn't that you can recover from it. It's finding out where it got in and getting it off of the systems first. It doesn't do you any good to restore your data if the virus is still there. You've got to make sure you got rid of it completely. That's the most time-consuming part. That's the part that takes those extra days. But especially in the dental field, this number may be a little bit low. If you're down for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, depending on the size of your practice, where you're located, it's certainly going to run into tens of thousands of dollars, and that's not including the ransom that you have to pay. And I've seen some really crazy numbers for ransomware demands, that the average is something like $174,000. I haven't seen that in the dental field as much. Typically they're going obviously for the big fish. Dental offices aren't as lucrative unless they can do something like they did in Wisconsin, where they hit 400 at once, or Kaseya, where they hit 1,500 IT providers at once. But typically the ones that we've seen in dentistry are anywhere from like 8 to 20,000 seems to be the range that we've seen from offices. But your mileage may vary. Either way, you don't want to ever get into this position. But something they do which is really kind of nasty, and this is actually, I just picked this up from yesterday. This was Accenture. They got hit. They're a global consulting firm. They got hit with ransomware as well. And you can see here in the second paragraph, it says, Accenture's encrypted files will be published by the group on the dark web on Wednesday unless they pay the ransom. We call that double encryption. I can't remember what the term is, double ransomware, double whatever. But it's not enough that they're saying, hey, you got to pay the ransom, because they know, as I saw from those previous statistics, that close to half the people have backup that they can restore from. So they know they're not necessarily going to get the money from them for that. But what they're saying is, okay, well, you don't want to pay. We're just going to take all your data and put it online. And you can imagine, if your patient data was posted online. It actually happened to a dental office in, I think they were in Pennsylvania. This was a number of years ago. They were put up on a torrent website. It was bad. It's not something you want to have happen. But these are just something, other examples of it where here's the names of companies that this is from the actual ransomware criminals, that here's the ones that weren't going to cooperate with us, so they're trying to hide our attack on them. So we're posting their data online. So it's not enough to really have really good backup. You want to make sure you don't get that ransomware in the first place for obvious reasons. So one of the questions I get from a lot of people, well, how does this tie in with HIPAA? I mean, are there any HIPAA rules about this? So really quick quiz for you. If you're hit with a ransomware virus, you must report a breach, true or false. And you don't have to type your answer in. You can just think of it, say it out loud. But the unfortunate thing is a lot of people don't know that this is true. A lot of us do not think of a ransomware infection as a breach. We think of a breach in terms of, well, someone hacked into your network, or you had a laptop or an external hard drive with patient data on it that was stolen or lost. That's not the way that the Office of Civil Rights and Health and Human Services thinks of it. They came out with a fact sheet. This was back in 2016. And the key part is right here at the top. This is section 6. In the last paragraph, that's when electronic particular health information is encrypted as a result of a ransomware attack, a breach has occurred because the ePHI encrypted by the ransomware was acquired, and thus is a disclosure not permitted under the HIPAA privacy rule. They have one kind of it's almost kind of like a get out of jail free card, but it really isn't. You look there. Basically your get out of jail free is that you don't have to declare a breach if you can show that there was a low probability that the ePHI has been compromised. And I've blown this up so you can just see this, in more, and better. So if you can establish that there's been low probability of compromise, then you may not necessarily have to report a breach. The problem is that they list these 4 things, but they don't tell you, well, here, 2 of these need to be true, or 3 need to be true, or 1 needs to be true. There's no guidance here. But when you look at those 4 things, nature and extent of the ePHI and the likelihood of re-identification, well, it's patient information that you have in your practice management software, images. It's absolutely high likelihood of re-identification. So you fail there. Do you know the unauthorized person to whom the disclosure was made? Nope, you certainly don't. At least I hope you don't. Those are not good people to be hanging around with. So that's 2 that you failed on. Do you know whether the ePHI was actually viewed? You have no clue. You have no way of knowing that. So far you're 0 for 3. The extent to which the risk has been mitigated. Well, everyone at some point can answer yes to that one, that yes, we've mitigated the risk. We got rid of the ransomware. It's my personal opinion that because of the fact that you would have to answer no to 3 of those 4, that you would not be able to say that there's a low probability of compromise, and as such, you would have to report a breach. Why is that such a big deal? Breach notification, from my standpoint, when it comes to HIPAA, I think breach notification is the absolute worst thing that could happen to a practice. And again, I apologize that the writing's a little bit smaller here. I wanted to try to get it all onto one page here. Unlike a lot of HIPAA, which is somewhat ambiguous, and we'll talk a little bit about required rules and addressable rules, the breach notification is very clear-cut, and it says that if you have suffered a breach, and as we've already established the fact that getting hit with ransomware is considered a breach, you must notify all your patients in writing or email if they've agreed to receive those notices electronically. You can't just post it on your door or something like that. And that's if you have 10 or more clients or patients. So you're all going to have to do that. You're going to have to notify the local media as long as you've got 500 or more patients, and that would be true for most of you on this call this evening. So you have to notify the local news media. You have to also have to what's called notice to the secretary. That means you go on to the Health and Human Services website. It's called the Wall of Shame. Definitely not a place you want to be, and you have to have your practice listed there as well. If you want to see how many practices are on there, just do a Google search for, HIPAA Wall of Shame, and, you can filter it, and there's dozens, if not hundreds of dental offices on there as well. I would venture a guess that for every practice that is on there that had reported a breach, I would venture at least 20, if not 50, for each one of those that didn't report it. A lot of people don't know that. Those 400 offices that were hit in Wisconsin, how many of them actually knew that they were supposed to report a breach? I would venture just a few. So there's probably a lot more. And as you saw from those earlier statistics, a third of all healthcare companies were hit last year with ransomware. So there's no doubt that the number of offices listed on that website is a fraction of the ones that have actually had that breach occur. So how do we deal with it? I'm going to give you individual steps at the very end here, but it's basically a 6-step plan of how do we deal with cybersecurity ransomware. I'll go through them individually, and then we'll go into each one in a little detail. Keep the bad guys out. As I said, to me, this is far better than being able to deal with it once they get in. There are things that you can do to keep those people and that type of malware out of your system. If it does get through those initial defenses, though, you want to be able to deal with it. We're going to talk about that. You absolutely need to have some type of encryption. This is your only get out of jail free card, and we'll talk about that or why that's so critical. You have to have a good backup and disaster recovery system. I really recommend some type of breach insurance or cyber liability insurance. A lot of our clients have that as well. It's gotten a lot more expensive because of how many offices have been hit with ransomware in the dental field. It's still, every couple of years we change carriers just because, the carrier jacks up the rates and we want to make sure it's affordable for our clients. Most of our clients are paying around 500 to 700 a year for a really like a $250,000 policy. It's not horribly expensive. Like I said, when you compare it to the cost of going through, downtime and legal fees and, and credit monitoring, it's nasty. So you should have some insurance, and you really should do a risk assessment as well. How do we get those bad guys out? As I said, that is, I think, is the most critical. Two methods: firewalls and patching. What's a firewall? We get this asked a lot. Well, it's a security device, and it monitors incoming and outgoing network traffic. The firewall, ideally, your IT person sets it up so that we decide, hey, this is good traffic, and there's things that are not good traffic, and we can set up these rules about what can get through the firewall and what can't. They've been around for like a quarter of a century, and they're always your first line of defense. It's a barrier between, your internal network, which is secured, and the outside, the internet, which is not so secured and not very trusted. It can be hardware, software, both. We always recommend a hardware firewall. A lot of the better firewalls out there actually have a software subscription of anti-malware, and it's not terribly expensive, usually a couple $100 a year, that will help to, again, be that first line of defense. So you really should set up and install a business class firewall. I don't recommend home routers. They all have firewalls by definition. Every, Cisco and Linksys and D-Link and Netgear, those are all have firewalls that are built in. They're not the best. There's nothing in HIPAA that says you have to have one firewall versus another. But there's also no doubt that some firewalls are better than others. You don't need to go crazy. You don't need to go out and spend $5,000 on a Cisco enterprise firewall, But the better ones from companies like Sophos or SonicWall, they're $600, $700. They're not terribly expensive. You have to have a firewall in place. We talked about, the breach notification rule, why it's so critical. If you're not really sure if your firewall is working, and we just, for any of our clients who do risk assessments, we do, one of the things that we do is penetration testing, where we actually try to see if we can get in. There's actually tests that you can do to hack in to try to see if you can get past that firewall. It's a great way of finding out if your firewall is doing what it's supposed to do. Like I said, there's a lot of good ones out there. I happen to love the Sophos one. One of the reasons that we like it from an IT standpoint is that it can be centrally managed. So we have access to, well over 100 of our clients' firewalls that we can change settings remotely from a portal. We don't have to log on, remotely access their system and put them at risk by doing that. We can do it all from our end. So they're all decent, ones out there, Sophos, SonicWall. But yeah, I highly recommend a separate firewall, not the one that's built into, not a home use one, not the one that's built into your cable modems router, a real firewall. We talked about patching. So, I think that's the only other pop quiz I have for you. HIPAA requires that you patch all the software on your computers on a regular basis. Is that true? Do you actually have to do it by law? And again, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know that answer is true. It's called patch management, and it is a law. It's a law from the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, that you can look it up. You actually have to do patch management. Just, do a search if you don't believe me on some of this. Do patch management, HIPAA law, and you'll see that it absolutely is a law. So you want to make sure that you keep your systems updated with critical security patches. Most of us in IT, we're what's called managed service providers, MSPs. One of the things that managed service providers do is patch management. Anyone worth their salt will offer this to you. It automates the process. In the past, what we had to do is take a list of every single program that you have running on your network. We would go out on a weekly basis, find the patches, apply them, reboot the computers. As you can imagine, that became very expensive for our clients because it took multiple hours per week for us to do that. But that process can all be automated now. But you really want to make sure you have the latest security patchers. It doesn't take long once these security holes are found for people to be able to break through them. And as I said, it is a HIPAA law. Let's say you've done all that. You've got a good firewall in place. You've got patch management going, but you can't prevent everything. Someone opens up an email that they shouldn't have. They click on a link. They insert a thumb drive into the computer that has some malware on it. What do you do at that point? Well, it starts with antivirus software, and I said you also need to have anti-ransomware, in my opinion. You got to have antivirus software that's current and up to date. Again, you want to do something a little bit better than the free crap that's out there. Whatever's built into Windows, Defender is, when they do these reviews of all the different antivirus programs, Defender is usually dead last. It's not the best. It's better than it was. It's still not the best. The free ones, the AVAS ones, we stay away from those as well. I highly recommend a good quality one like ESET Nod 32, which is what we use for our clients, Trend Micro, Kaspersky. They're all decent. The typical program is going to run you $30 a year, $25 a year per computer. It's worth it, in my opinion. But don't forget about spyware as well. You have to get that off as well. And we'll talk about Intercept X and Hitman Pro in a second. So, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of decent ones out there. I stay away from the free ones like Avira, but ESET, Norton, we tried that years ago. I hated it. It was always slowing things down. But, ESET's a decent one. But I definitely recommend that you have anti-ransomware specific software as well on top of your regular antivirus. Intercept X is the one that we've been using forever. They got bought out by Sophos a couple of years ago, so they're part of Sophos. It interacts really nicely with the firewalls that we have, so that's one of the reasons that we like using it. There's Hitman Pro. There's other ones out there, but they're specific for ransomware. And again, no one wants to spend more money than they have to, but $40, $50 per PC per year to have that peace of mind, to me is definitely worth considering. Let's put it that way. This is the thing that has me most excited, and it's called application whitelisting. Some people use the term ring fencing. To me, it's the greatest tool that we've seen against malware. Conceptually, I think it's relatively easy to understand. I'll show you a slide in a second. To actually implement it is not so easy. It's not something that I would ever recommend you do on your own. Most of the companies that create this type of software won't even allow end users to purchase it. You've got to be an IT company in order to get it, because it does take a lot of setup and management to do it right. But the actual concept is relatively easy. So what is application whitelisting? Basically, it's a practice of specifying, what programs are okay to run on your system and which ones are not. What you're trying to do is prevent any unapproved software from running. The way that ring fencing works is that it basically says, let's say you're an OpenDental user, for example, you've got an OpenDental database, you can specify, here are the programs that have access to that database. It's going to be OpenDental. Perhaps your image management software is going to need to access it. Maybe you're using patient reminders like Yappy or Demandforce or Solution Reach, ones like those. They need to access it. But you set up a list to say, here's the programs that can access it. Nobody else can get it in there. That's what's called ring fencing. So as I said, to me, it's a really exciting concept. If you think about it, all malware, all viruses, all ransomware, they're just tiny little programs. And the program is just a series of instructions. And the instructions for ransomware would typically be along the lines of, okay, get onto the system, hide yourself, disable all the antivirus software that's on here, encrypt the files, leave a ransom note, and delete yourself. That's basically it. The way that the application whitelisting works is we put the software on every computer, we let it run for about a week or two, and it takes inventory of all the programs that you currently have. It also, the beauty of it for us now is that we've got so many clients that are using this, is that it also compares that against the list of software programs that our other clients have. So, you may not use Adobe on your computer, but other people do. So that all gets put into like our global list of approved software. We let it run for about a week or two. At a certain point, we flip the switch and it goes into what's called deny all mode. And at that point, that's the blue circle you see there. Any new application is initially blocked until it becomes trusted. Let's say you're an OpenDental user and they just came out with a patch or an update to the software. You're the first one of our clients that goes to install that patch. It's going to be blocked because the software doesn't know what it is. You send us, there's actually the way that the software works, it'll actually send us a little thing, like a little thing to our ticket queue that says, that you've been blocked. We know exactly what the program is, obviously. We log into the portal, we trust it. We approve the software, and within about 2 minutes, you're back up and running. The next one of our clients who gets that Open Dental update, they're not going to get that error because that program, that patch has already been approved and applied globally to all of our clients. So it's only the first person, and usually, like I said, it's only usually 2 minutes, not a big deal. But this really tends to lock it down completely. Any unapproved software will literally not run. I've got it on all my home computers. My son's into gaming a lot, and a lot of times he wants to download games or that stuff, and it just, we always have to remember it's not going to run because it's not on the approved list. So I got to go into the portal and trust it. And as I said, it's 2 minutes. It's not a major pain, but compared to the other side, which is, let's say, I get ransomware and everything's locked down, to me, it's almost a no-brainer. As I said, I'm really excited about this technology. I think it's relatively easy to understand that what's good can run, what's not can't. But I definitely don't recommend that. Even if you find someone who allows you to buy it and do it on your own, it's a lot more behind the scenes than it may appear. So this is what actually happens: is that when one of our clients would try to run a program, they get a pop-up that says, the request to run a new program. This was actually something called PuTTY. We just did this as a test. It's for remote access to a certain degree within a network, and it just sends us that request. And we get it in our queue. We clear up the program, and at that point, it takes about a minute and a half for it to clear, and then you're good to go. Other things that I think you should be doing. We talked about this 6-step plan. Lock it down. Encryption. And this is kind of like a pet peeve of mine. We get this a lot. So, do you have to encrypt? Because there are people out there who feel you don't. If you actually look at the HIPAA rules, encryption and decryption is what's called addressable. Let's talk about that term because I think a lot of people misunderstand it. What does addressable actually mean? There are 2 types of rules, by the way. There's required rules. I think all of you can understand what that means. You got to do it. No ifs, ands, or buts. Addressable means, and I put the emphasis is mine in the bold here, a covered entity, which is you, must implement, emphasis on must, an addressable implementation specification if it's reasonable and appropriate to do so, and must implement an equivalent alternative if the addressable implementation specification is unreasonable and inappropriate. So basically, you got to do it if it's reasonable and appropriate, or come up with some alternative. What is reasonable and appropriate? Well, that's where it becomes tricky. Because in essence, the way that HIPAA defines it is that you get to decide what's reasonable and appropriate. However, if you should ever get audited, God forbid, at that point, you no longer get to decide what's reasonable and appropriate. The auditor does. And for something like encryption, it's going to be a really tough argument from the standpoint that all versions of Windows Server from 2012 onwards, so anything in the last 9+ years, has a free program built into it called BitLocker. It's there. You can use it. Do I recommend that you do it on your own? Probably not, unless you've done it a lot. It's better probably to have some IT professional help you out with it. It's going to take a few hours of their time. But it's free. I mean, their time's not free, but the software itself is free. It's built into there. Let's say, Windows 10, all versions of Windows 10 have BitLocker built into it as well, so you can do it on all your workstations as well. Do you have to do it? If you're storing any electronic protected health information on your workstation, which we don't recommend, but if you are, you really should encrypt those computers as well. Let's say you've got a really old computer. Well, there's old programs that can do that. VeraCrypt and TrueCrypt. These are free programs. They're if you're still rocking Server 2008, which didn't have BitLocker into it, you could still run VeraCrypt. So there's ways around this requirement. But I highly recommend this. As I mentioned earlier, this is your only get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to the breach notification. I had that big thing up there about the breach notification that you've got to notify your patients. If you have encrypted your data and you have evidence that you've encrypted your data, you are exempt from the breach notification rule. You do not need to notify your patients or the local news media or list your practice on the Health and Human Services website if you have encrypted the data. So, even if you're thinking, well, it's an addressable and it's a HIPAA thing and I don't really need, I don't know if I have to do it. To me, it's pretty much a no-brainer from the standpoint, well, why wouldn't you? Because if you ever have something horrible happen, if someone hacks into your network, if your server gets stolen, if you don't have that evidence of encryption, there's no more, there's no ambiguity there. You've got to report the breach. So highly recommend that you do this. Backup, we could spend hours talking about it. We're already, at 10 towards the top of the hour, so I'm not going to spend, more than a couple of minutes talking about it. Everyone's got their own way of doing backup. Hopefully you're still not using tape. We used tape once or twice 20 years ago, but the problem with the tape backup is that you need a tape drive. So if your server goes down, so goes the tape drive. So, you have no way of restoring it easily. You still, I guess there's some people out there that use rewritable CD-ROMs or DVD drives. Still some people using external portable hard drives. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, actually nowadays with ransomware becoming such a big deal, the whole concept of having your backup separate from your main network, the concept is called air gapping, where it's on a physically separate, like there's air between that device and the rest of your network. There's more and more people that we're working with. They're saying, hey, maybe I should add back an external hard drive, that at least take it out of the office, at least if not every night, once a week. I wouldn't talk you out of that. It's not a bad idea. We have cloud backup for our clients as well, but there's all kinds of different backup software programs out there, some better than other. I highly recommend, by HIPAA law, you have to have your backup has to be what's called retrievable. And by definition, that means offsite. I think online is the easiest way to do it because it's offsite, it's secure, it's automatic. You don't need to set it and forget it. Usually, as an IT company, we never set it and forget it. We monitor it every single day, but it's not something you should be having to worry about. But to be HIPAA compliant, there has to be encryption keys with it. You want to make sure that whichever company you're using, they've got multiple servers, that it can handle open databases, multiple versions of your data, so you can restore from a few days ago if you need to. And again, you just want it to be as automated and eliminate that human component as much as possible. We call our service Data Protect. There's other companies out there that do this for their client. Every IT company out there offers some type of data backup. So one thing to make sure that is that backup, like I said, it has to be offsite. And don't get that confused with redundancy. A lot of people have servers that have mirrored hard drives. You have a RAID 1 or a RAID 5 or RAID 10. That's not backup. That's redundancy. That's not going to help you if there's a fire or a theft or a flood. It's got to be something you can take off-site, either an external hard drive or online or a combination. The way that we set it up for our clients is to do what's called an image, where we take an exact copy of the entire server, not just the data, but everything, the program files, the network settings. We put that on a local device. We prefer to put it on a souped up computer because then we can boot that computer as an emergency server. There's some cases where an office system doesn't want to spend the money on that, so we'll put it on an external hard drive. But then we have to copy it over before we can actually restore it, so that takes longer. But again, there's a lot of ways to skin this cat, but you really should have something you can restore quickly. The way that we set it up, in theory, you should be able to restore the backup from that local backup within an hour or two. We say 2 hours for our clients. Sometimes it's a lot faster than that. Sometimes if they've got like a ton of cone beam images, it can take a little bit longer than that. And of course, typically the first thing we're going to do is try to get your main server up and running so that the clock doesn't start ticking until we actually try to restore it. Always faster and easier to just get the server up and running than it is to restore a backup. But if we do determine that your server is down for the count, then the backup kicks in. As I said, you really should have some type of insurance policy. There's all kinds of different policies out there: cyber liability, cyber breach. We use, I think it's through Chubb. They're like an international company. As I said, they're not terribly expensive policies. Most of our clients are around $500 to $700 a year. Some, they base it on your production. So if you're a $2, $3, $4 million a year practice, it's going to be a little bit more pricey. I don't think we've got anyone spending more than about $1,200 a year for their insurance. But I definitely recommend. No HIPAA law that says you have to be insured, but if you ever get hit with ransomware or have to declare a breach, as I mentioned, you've got a world of hurt because you're going to have legal fees, you're going to have downtime. It's considered standard of care to provide some type of credit monitoring for those patients for at least a year or two. Fines and penalties. It's going to be in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So you really should have some type of policy in my best recommendation. The last thing before we get into the nitty gritty of what I actually highly recommend that you do and how to go about doing it is you need to do a risk assessment. How do you do that? Well, here's the challenge with risk assessments. if you actually look up the rule about risk assessment, and or they call it risk analysis here, it's letter A here, and it is required, so that's not an addressable thing. What you see here is it. There's literally one sentence in the HIPAA rules about how to do a risk assessment, and it's not how to do it, it's just that you got to do it. They don't give you any guidance at all. That being the case, there is one document out there. It's by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, Guide for Conducting Risk Assessments. It is 95 pages long. If any of you suffer from insomnia, it is a great cure for that, because 2 pages in, you'll be out. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version because it's what you would all probably know already. You've got to be comprehensive. That's one of my pet peeves, is that there's companies out there that tell you, hey, go online, take our 10-minute questionnaire and you're done. And they use the fact that the HIPAA, as I said, that there's only one sentence that says that you have to do it, and there's no guidance there. The HIPAA auditors will laugh you out of there. Well, they'll laugh at first before they start finding you up the wazoo, because that is not a comprehensive. It's like basically treating the patient because you took their dental history. Right? That's not enough. You got to take the x-rays and do the chart. Same thing here. You've got to do a full analysis of the IT systems. When we do it for our clients, it takes about 5 to 8 hours. You got to look at things from a physical standpoint, locks on the doors, alarm systems, where do you keep the charts, administrative, policies and procedure manuals, incident response forms. It has to be comprehensive. When we do it for our clients, as I said, it takes a number of hours. They get a risk score from the software. Almost all of our clients start off at this high risk score. But it's pretty, and this is one that we do for our clients, where it's pretty, as I said, it's pretty thorough. It takes quite some time to do it, but it looks at everything. It tells them, which HIPAA requirement that they're in violation of, what the issue is, what the recommendation is. It really should be something comprehensive. If it's done properly, you get what we call our version of the treatment plan, which is a HIPAA management plan. And those are the steps that you need to take. If you ever get audited, and it does happen more and more frequently to offices, if you're audited, the absolute first thing they're going to look for is a copy of your risk assessment and a copy of management plan. Just like if, God forbid, a patient sues you and you go to court, first thing you're going to have to show is your treatment plan and your progress notes and your records. Same thing with this. You've got to have that in place. If you don't have it, it goes downhill quickly. And it makes sense if you think about it. How can you know that you're HIPAA compliant, that you're cyber secure, that you're doing what you need to do unless you look? I mean, you have to look, and you have to look well to be able to make that determination. So that's their mindset. If you have done that risk assessment, and they don't expect that you're going to do everything. Like when we do our management plan for our clients, it's usually about 7, 8 pages long. Typical client takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get through that initial set of things. There's no rule that says you have to do it on day one. What they want to see if you're ever audited is, hey, have you done the risk assessment? Great. Do you have a plan in place? And have you at least started to make some progress on that to address the issues that are on there? And if the answer is yes, that's all that they're looking for. And that's really what you should be doing. So here's kind of the end of the webinar here, my final steps. It's kind of a recap of everything that I recommended. I'll make a couple of offers at the end, and then we're going to go to any questions that are available right now. So what are the things that I think you should do right now? First thing, when you get back to your practice in the morning, what are the things that you really should start looking into? First thing, as I said, you've got to do that risk assessment. By HIPAA law, it should be done on a quote-unquote regular basis. What is regular? I think annual is fine. Most of our clients, when we first start working with them, we do it every 3 or 4 months. Partially because of the fact that we find so many things that we just want to keep them on track of doing those things. We want to redo the risk assessment every few months, make sure they're staying on track with it. Usually after that first year, we'll get it back to like once a year, twice a year. But you want to start off with that because you don't know what you don't know, and you've got to look. When I say it takes 5 to 8 hours, it takes us 5 to 8 hours. It takes you maybe 10 to 15 minutes. We have like that questionnaire we have what's called a site survey. That's the more of the physical stuff that we have some questions that we would ask. You have to get us logged onto the systems. But beyond that, we can do it over a weekend. It's not something you have to be sitting there and be down for 8 hours. We can do it while you're up and running. So that's never a problem. But do it on a regular basis, and make sure you have that HIPAA management plan. And that you're working towards resolving the issues that are on there. Some of them, are more difficult to do than others. For example, one of the things that HIPAA says you really are supposed to do is to be able to track who accessed patient information, when do they access it, what do they do with it. In your practice management software, that's relatively easy because you've got you've got an audit trail. So each person's got their own login. A lot of offices don't do that for their Windows computers. They have everyone's got the staff is the one username and the same password. But the problem is that you have so many other sources of patient information. You've got emails or images or spreadsheets or Word documents or Invisalign or QuickBooks or lab slips or referral forms. There's just so many places that have patient information. So the easiest way to be able to track that is to set up your network as a domain and set up individual users with passwords. Well, that's really a pain in the rear for an office if they're already set up as a work group to change over. So we have a lot of offices that we tell them, hey, ideally you should do this, but it's a major undertaking, and a lot of offices don't want to do that. They say to us, hey, if we ever get notified that we're going to be audited, we'll do it then. So not that I obviously recommend that, but you want to get this done beforehand if you ever get notice of an audit. You really should have a policies and procedure manual. A lot of you probably have the ADA manual. If you bought the ADA manual and just put it on your shelf somewhere and forgot about it, crack it open someday. It's not really a manual. It's just a bunch of templates. It takes days to fill out the stuff that's in there. So make sure that when we do it for our clients, when we do a risk assessment, we give them a customized manual. Those are pretty much a dime a dozen. I've never heard of anyone that had a HIPAA audit that got dinged because their manual wasn't adequate. They're not going through the manual. They want to see that you've got it and that it's a standard type of manual. But you got to have something in place. I do recommend some type of cyber liability insurance, as I've said. We start with $250,000. We have clients that want $500,000, $1 million. It depends if you're a larger group practice or a DSO. Individual practice, we've never seen first-time fines exceed more than about $55,000 to $75,000. But if you want to go higher than $250,000, by all means, it can be provided for you. Encryption, as I mentioned, it's your get-out-of-jail-free card. Encrypt any computer that contains EPHI, Electronic Protected Health Information. That is absolutely a HIPAA requirement. Lots of ways to do that. You really should be encrypting your email as well. This system's out there that we've always recommended for our clients, AppRiver, Secure Mail. You could use, they're not as good as some of the encrypted ones that we like, but certainly Google, Google for Workplace, they've got, you can't use the free ones, basically what I'm saying. The Google for Workplace, all the decent encrypted email providers out there are around $8 to $10 per user per month. But I highly recommend it. For the better systems out there, you don't need to change your email address. You can keep using what you've always done. You're having, again, with a lot of the HIPAA stuff, it's not so much that you do what you're supposed to do, it's that you document what you're supposed to be doing. So, I highly recommend that you have some type of encrypted email system. We've talked about this. Some type of backup and disaster recovery system really should be in place. Network monitoring, patch management. There's no HIPAA law about the network monitoring, but it's the same software that does the patch management, and there absolutely is a HIPAA requirement that you keep your systems patched and up to date. Antivirus software, make sure that you have current software and that it's up to date. Ransomware protection, we talked about the programs that are out there. Highly recommend that you look into application whitelisting. I'm going to send all of you who are on the webinar some more information about some of the things that we're recommending, because I think it's such a game changer. And have some special offers as well. I actually didn't put the offer in here. Most of the time, most of the programs that we've seen for application whitelisting are usually around $200 a month, give or take, for an entire office. That seems to be the going rate. We've been able to work with a vendor where we can cut that in half. So it's like $99 a month to get it for up to 15 computers. So definitely something worth looking at. That's another offer. I'll send that out to everybody because I don't think I put that on my slides. Another thing that we didn't really talk about, anybody that has access to your data, and I'm talking about your IT company, whoever handles your email system, your backup, your practice management software company, if they're logging in to do remote support, practice management consultants, accountants, anyone that can see your data, you have to have a signed business associates agreement with them. We actually have a template that we use for all of our clients. and I will send that to all of you when I send the follow-up email, probably as I said, either this evening or tomorrow. I will send you a copy of the BAA so you can have it. You just fill in your name and the business associate's name. Both people sign it, keep a copy, and you're done. So I'm happy to provide that for everyone at no cost. You really should do some staff training. Again, I'll send this link out to everyone. We work with a company called Formed Training. You should do the training, I think, on an annual basis. The one that we use, it's an online training. It takes about 45 minutes. They can stop and start whenever they want. At the end, you take a quiz, which is almost impossible to fail. At that point, you get a certificate that says you've been trained. You stick it in your manual. Don't worry about it again for another year or two. But again, you really should have some type of staff training, not just from the HIPAA standpoint, but just from peace of mind. Like, when people forget stuff, and they need to be able to recognize phishing emails and bad websites, and just best practices. It's never a bad idea to do, just like you do CE for your stuff, and hygienists do it and assistants do it. There's no reason that your front office staff shouldn't be trained as well on a regular basis. Make sure that for any sites that do offer, and again, this is a question to ask your IT company as well. Hey, you guys are providing remote access to us. I know you guys do some remote monitoring. Does your system use two-factor authentication? Do you use multi-factor authentication? Hopefully they'll say yes, because that's a biggie. That's to me, it's almost standard of care at this point. They really should be doing something like that. So I do have 3 offers. As I said, we actually got, I mentioned the 4th one about we can do the application whitelisting at half the cost. First off, as I mentioned at the beginning, I said this a couple of times during the webinar, you don't know what you don't know. And there's an easy way to find out what you don't know. We call it a security audit or a tech audit. It's not to be confused with a full risk assessment. A security audit typically takes 20 to 30 minutes. We hop onto your computers. We get some basic information. We talk to you, your office manager, ask a couple questions for things that we can't see on the computers. Hey, how often do you guys back up? How are you emailing patients or other offices? When's the last time you did a risk assessment? Do you have a manual? That type of stuff. So the whole process takes maybe 20, 30 minutes. Based on all of that, I would then be able to sit down on a phone call with you. Again, that only takes about 20, 30 minutes, and then send you a full report of everything that we found, what we recommend, what the options are, if we were to do it, how much it would cost, so there's never any obligation. And that's one thing that's really important. We typically in the past have charged about $100 for this. Up through the end of this month, it's free. I'm not going to charge anybody. I actually changed my website in order to accommodate that. My website's thedigitalDentist.com. We're also offering free IT consulting through the end of the month as well. And again, I typically charge an hourly rate for that. And again, it's all through my website, thedigitalDentist.com. And this is how you would go. You just go to thedigitalDentist.com. You can do it now if you want. If you have more questions, you want to sign up for that free audit. I'll need your name, your practice name, your email, your phone number. That sends an email to my office manager. She'll then contact you through email typically or phone call and just say, hey, let's set up a time to talk and see what your needs are. Or we can just go ahead and just set up your audits as well. As I said, we do this for free. Any person that's ever worked with me knows, we are not about holding a gun to your head and high pressure, anything like that. To me, the critical thing is education. I want you to understand where you're at risk and what you can and should be doing to reduce that risk. Obviously, I would love to work with you. I mean, that's why we do this, and that's my whole career is helping offices out. So we would love to work with you, but there is zero obligation to work with us. If you want to take that report and give it to your IT people or talk to other people locally, fine, by all means do that. As I say, if I can help you to avoid some very expensive mistakes, then I feel good about that. But in the end, yes, we would love to help you. What you're going to find is that, like I said, there's a lot of IT companies, even if they specialize in dental or healthcare, that may not be doing some of the things that we do. The risk assessments, for example, the application whitelisting. We also learned quite some time ago, I'll add, how to play nicely with others. So if you decide, hey, I love my local IT guys and they're great, But, they don't do the risk assessments. They don't offer this application whitelisting. Hey, Lauren, was your company willing to work with my local IT company and, add and kind of fill in the gaps of what they're doing? And the answer is yes, of course. We do this all the time. Every day we work with local IT companies. So yes, we have clients who want us to take over the IT, and we're happy to do that. We have others who say, I feel more comfortable having someone locally, but they're not HIPAA cybersecurity experts, and I want them to handle the day-to-day stuff. We want you guys, Lauren, to handle all the cybersecurity and HIPAA. So the bottom line is, what's going to give you the peace of mind to sleep well at night, and whatever that is, that's what you should be doing, in my opinion. As I mentioned, I'm going to send out that business associate agreement. It's a template that you can use. It's free. We'll send that to everyone. And there are just so many ways. And the third one, as I said, was the reduced price for, and I forgot to put a slide on that because this is so new, the application whitelisting. There's plenty of ways that you can get a hold of me. As I mentioned, you just go to the website, thediginaldentist.com. You can email me at drlevine@thediginaldentist.com. You can call our toll-free number, 866-204-3398. Extension 200 gets you to Candace, my office manager. She'll be happy. By the way, we don't charge for phone calls either. So if you want to pick my brain and say, hey, I'm opening up a new office, or gee, I'm really worried about this HIPAA cybersecurity stuff. Tell me, what are the one or two things I should really do right away? You just want to, have me evaluate what your IT people are recommending to you. I'll never charge for that time. So I'm happy to take phone calls as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on all the major social media platforms as well. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions. It looks like we've already gotten some questions that have come in. So I'm going to pull these up. Okay, and we don't actually have a ton of questions here yet. So any questions? I'll stay on for the next few minutes if people want to ask some questions. But hopefully, the goal here, like I said, was to give you information that you can use that are going to help you in your day-to-day practices. The best advice I can give you is if you're really not sure where you're at and what you need to be doing, take advantage of that free offer for the security audit. Again, we call it a security audit or tech audit. It's all the same thing. It doesn't take a lot of time. I said it takes 20, 30 minutes. That's for us. It takes maybe 5 minutes of yours or your office manager time to get us onto one of your computers. If you're worried about that, you can sit there and watch us what we're doing. We're happy to sign a BAA if you're worried about us hopping onto your computer, as you probably actually should, because unless you close out your software programs, but you can watch what we do. We're not opening up your practice management software or anything like that. We're just getting the stats for your server as far as the amount of free storage. So the question here about the Barracuda system. Barracuda is a good system. I mean, Barracuda has a lot of different products. They're better known for their firewalls. They also have a backup and disaster recovery system as well. When we looked into them, we just found that they were pricey. That was my only feeling. We're always looking for value. That's kind of like a thing that, every IT company is different. And some people, they see the word dentist or dental in front of the name, and, all of a sudden the price goes up. I hate that. Obviously, because I was a practicing periodontist for 10 years. So I'm not crazy about that mindset. I'm always looking for value. Yes, you can go crazy. The stuff that I've talked about, I work with people all the time who say, I'm working with an IT company and they don't do all the stuff that you do, and they have us paying a monthly fee for all these different services, and it's $2,500 a month or $3,000 a month. And I'm like, that's nuts. Again, it's not to criticize other companies, but I think our highest paying client, who's got like every single service that we offer, is like $1,100 a month, and most are a little bit less than that. So there's all kinds of options out there. As I said, if you're looking for firewalls, the system that we like is Sophos. They've got different models out there. The one that I like is the XG series, like the 105s. A decent firewall is probably going to run you $600-700, and as I mentioned before, maybe a couple $100 a year for an anti-malware subscription. Backup and disaster recoveries, there's really no mainstream backup and disaster recovery system that we trust or recommend, just because it's so specialized and individualized, I think, for healthcare. So, people all the time ask me, well, what about, Mozy or Carbonite? And, there's issues about whether they're even HIPAA compliant or not. The biggest question, I think, for a lot of offices when it comes to your backup and disaster recovery isn't so much, am I backing up the data? Hopefully the answer is yes. So most of them do a good job with that. HIPAA laws say that you really have to test and verify that on a regular basis. A lot of you, and an email saying, hey, the backup was successful isn't it. You actually have to do a test restore. We do this for all of our clients on a regular basis. But the big issue from my standpoint with your BDR system is whether the data is being backed up. It's how quickly can you get up and running if your server goes down. Because for most dental practices, your server goes down, you're down. You have no idea who's coming in. You can't take x-rays. You can't chart me. You're completely dependent on that server being up and running. So, a really well-designed, and that's why we do these disk images. Because if you think about it, let's say you just back up the data. Well, the way that you're going to have to restore from that is you're going to have to get another server or another computer that can act like a server in there. Then you have to reinstall all your program files. Then you have to take all that data, and for some offices, we're talking hundreds of gigabytes, if not terabytes of data, move that over to that new device, re-network all the workstations. That's why you're down for a day, 2 days, if not longer. That's pricey. Most of our clients, when it comes to their backup system, they don't want to be measuring downtime in days. They want to be measured in minutes. So, that's one thing that, if you're not comfortable with how your IT people are doing, if you're not sure if you have a good system, I'm happy to have that conversation with you to go into more depth about, what you really should be doing when it comes to backup and disaster recovery. But to me, as I said, the key issue is you've got to be able to get back up and running quickly, because otherwise you're just, you're down. You just can't, you're dead in the water. So as a question here, what is your comparable on-site BDR? So so there's two types of devices, well, three devices you can do for your on-site backup. The most common one, people call it a NAS, which stands for Network Attached Storage. We use that term loosely because we don't actually, a traditional NAS, Network Attached Storage, doesn't actually have Windows on it. It's using Linux. There's companies out there, a lot of companies that do NAS devices. They tend to be cheaper, so that's why people tend to use them. We don't like to use that from the standpoint that we want to have a Windows device, because the fastest way that you can restore, if you have an image of the server, is to just boot it up. To boot it up, it has to be running on a computer. So we'll call it a NAS for our clients. It's actually just a souped up Dell computer. It is a Dell computer with a Core i5 or a Core i7 processor. We usually put 16 gigs of RAM in there, tons of hard drive space. We want to have multiple copies at the back. So we'll do like a 4 terabyte storage in there or greater. That is our device. Now, in theory, as I said, you can also do an external hard drive. They are very inexpensive. You can get 8 terabytes for, I don't know, $100, $125, that they're not expensive. But the problem is that if the data is on there, it's going to be awfully slow if you try to basically, have it connected to another computer. The more common scenario when someone has their data on an external hard drive is we boot up a virtual copy onto another computer, but then we have to copy all that data over. So that is very time consuming. That can take a day or two depending on how much data you have. So that's why we recommend, say, like basically, we'll call it an emergency server or a secondary server. It's not really a server, but it's basically a workstation with a full copy of the server that's on there. For the offsite, we use we have what's called a co-location. Most of our clients are on there where we actually have, it's a huge server. It's got, I think, 96 terabytes of storage that we have on there. We haven't filled it up, thankfully, yet. That we don't actually have it here. We have it at a HIPAA compliant data center that's under like lock and key, and it's got guards, and it's got full redundancy and multiple servers. We have a lot of our clients on that. We have a few that are online with companies like Backblaze or Amazon or Wasabi, but we prefer to have control over it. So, that's just, as I said, there's all kinds of IT people, all kinds of ways of dealing with things. Our preferred thing is to have more control. So we kind of, roll our own when it comes to the different types of systems that we do. We're just not thrilled with something. We want to have control. We want to be able to get the data quickly if we need to. If you have, like, for example, if you have a Mozy or Carbonite or one of those cheap systems and you need to get your data overnighted to you, maybe they'll do it, but it depends what time of the day you call them. You might be waiting a few days just for them to even send it to you. That doesn't work for us. It doesn't work for our clients. I mean, we've got the data. We want to be able to get to them quickly, which is why we always want to have a local device. We honestly, by law, as I said, your backup has to be retrievable, which means off-site. We've had to do over 20 years, I'd say maybe 30 to 40 restores over the years for various reasons. I can only think of one that was done through actually two that were done through our off-site backup. One was in Joplin, Missouri, when they had all those tornadoes a number of years ago, and one was New Jersey with the hurricane a number of years ago. I can't remember which hurricane it was. Those are the only two times where we had offices that were completely, everything they had locally was lost, and we had to restore from the cloud. 99.999% of the time, we're restoring from that local backup. That's the most critical one. That's the image. Just because your internet connection is usually a lot slower than your local network. It'll take if you've got like a typical office of, a couple hundred gigs of data, depending on your internet, that could take days, if not weeks, to download that. So we never want to restore from there unless we have to. So I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. Actually, here's another question here. What about SAN, which is also called Storage Area Network, in addition to the NAS? I'm sure. I mean, as I said, there's so many different ways to skin a cat here. Every IT person is going to give you different recommendations about what works and what's best. It's just depends what works best for you. For example, most of the IT people out there, when it comes to recommending a server, they recommend RAID 5 or RAID 10. RAID 5 is 3 or more hard drives that are mirrored together with one of them. 2 of them are basically mirroring each other. You have one that's called a parity drive. RAID 10 is kind of a combination of RAID 1, which is 2 mirrored drives, and RAID 0, where the data is stripped between different drives. We just don't think it's we just don't get that fancy. We just good old-fashioned RAID 1, which is 2 hard drives that are mirrored. We just, to me, that's the easiest to restore. If a hard drive goes bad, you pop it out. You still run off the good drive. You get Dell to come out there within 4 hours. They pop in the new drive, or you do it at the end of the day when you're done, and it rebuilds the RAID array, and you're good to go. So same thing with this. We try to keep it simple, just because we don't want to be sitting there scratching our heads when it comes time to restore. Like, oh, geez, this thing is so complicated, and do we remember how to do this? Because we don't. Let's say we've done 30 or 40 over 20 years. It's not like a weekly thing for us, and I don't want to be sitting there saying, oh, gee, I got to call up the company now, remember how to do this and do that. And it's just, why make it more complicated than it has to be? So we always try to make it as simple as possible, with the fact that our clients can understand what we're doing, that they can understand the email reports that they get from us, that we can understand it as well. So as I said, to each their own. So as a reminder, this webinar was recorded. I will be sending out that recording probably tomorrow morning. I'm just thinking I may not be able to get it done this evening, but I'll do my best. If not tonight, then tomorrow. I'm going to send out the CE certificates as well. Any of you that made it this far means you were here for the whole webinar. You will get a CE form. It's California approved CE credits. Pretty much every state that I know of will take California CE credits. You just put in you fill out your name and information and submit it to your state boards. I have a lot more stuff I can send you. That's how we talked about the BAA, which is the Business Associates Agreement. I got a lot of free goodies I'm more than happy to send out, which I'll send out over the next few weeks. How to choose an IT provider, and how to prevent yourself from being hijacked with email. There's a lot of things that we can do to help. And as a final thing, as I said, my final offer is, which I've repeated a couple of times, is that I would love to work with any of you, whether it is just to help guide you or whether it is to actually work together. And it typically almost always starts with that. that technology audit, that security audit. It doesn't take long, no charge for it, no pressure, no obligation. You'll have the information that you can then decide, hey, I want to do this on my own. I want my IT company to do this. We want you, Lauren, to fill in the gaps that our IT company isn't comfortable doing. We want you to take over the IT. Or some combination of the above. We're flexible, but I would absolutely love to work with any of you in any capacity. So look for those emails from me over the next number of days. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I know your time is valuable. As I said when we started, my number one goal was that you learned one thing that you didn't know before you came here this evening. Hopefully that was the case. And if that is the case, then I accomplished my goal. Anything I can do to help you, to get you, like I said, give you the peace of mind to sleep well at night, knowing that your data is secure, that you're meeting HIPAA requirements, that you're doing everything in your power to protect and secure your data, we're here to assist. So thank you all for joining this evening. And we do these webinars on a regular basis. A lot of you were on webinars that I do with Golden Dental for Physics Forceps. A lot of you are on some of the DenMat ones. But I do the ones for myself usually every 6 weeks or so. So please keep an eye on your inbox for future webinars. Like I said, I think the next one we're just going to throw it out there to say, hey, tell me what your most burning questions are, and I'll gather all those questions and make sure that we do a webinar that's based around the things that are important to all of you. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you all on future webinars. Good night, everyone.